Hello and welcome to this Bitcoin Magazine interview. I am Vlad and my guest is Bruce Fenton, who is the CEO of Chainstone Labs and has been for a long time involved into the Bitcoin space and has a lot of knowledge and financial involvement, so skin in the game. And I'm glad to have him here. So hello, Mr. Fenton.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
So you got in the Bitcoin space in 2012, right?
Yes.
And that was 7 years ago, roughly.
Right.
So you have been involved in the Bitcoin Foundation as a director. You also had your points of view in various points of Bitcoin's development and how the narrative was being regarded. And you made it this far, and you're still involved, and you still find some kind of satisfaction probably in being involved in Bitcoin. So how has this ride been so far?
It's been a wild ride. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I've joked with friends that even if it all just fell apart and went to zero somehow, we would still probably meet up and get together. I'd still probably host the Satoshi Roundtable. Maybe it'd be at a hotel. If nobody had any money, maybe it'd be at a Motel 6 or something. But I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. I think it's been really intellectually stimulating and never-ending fascination. So many interesting people, interesting passions. It's just really exciting, and I've been able to learn a lot. I think anybody who gets into this, some people come from computer science, some people come from law or whatever. I've heard it said that you need to kind of master 9 different sets of knowledge to understand Bitcoin, and nobody comes in with all 9 of them. I had some of the finance and economics ones, but I was lacking on some of the computer science and open source knowledge sets. So I learned a lot about those kind of things, the nature of open source and cypherpunk values and these kind of things. So I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think that's been really exciting and really fun.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about Bitcoin OGs is that they always say that even if the coins went to zero in terms of valuation, they would still support the project and find something interesting in it, and developers would possibly still do cool stuff with the protocol. And this is something that you don't find in other projects. They have all sorts of expectations and financing and VCs, and unless they meet some kind of goals, they're not going to be around and nobody's going to care much about them.
Yeah, that's huge. It's really one of the it's got to be the most powerful open source, in my opinion, the most powerful and important open source project out there. And that's the power of open source, is because there's no metric saying that, okay, Satoshi raised X and it's got to deliver X by, fourth quarter, whatever. It's just volunteers. Everybody contributes in their own way. Even people like me who don't know how to code can still contribute by talking about it and increasing awareness and building on top of it. And look at what we've created. I mean, it's just this massive, massive industry. You have something like 800 contributors to the core GitHub repository, but that's just scratching the surface. There's hundreds and hundreds of other engineers on second layer stuff and wallets and things like that. And there's thousands of executives and promoters and authors of books and everything like that. So it's really exciting to show the power that an all volunteer system can do. Bitcoin belongs to all of us, so it's for everybody to kind of build together, and that's worked out pretty amazingly. I don't think there's anything like it.
When you first got into Bitcoin, there wasn't so much stuff around. You didn't have books, you didn't have podcasts. There were just a bunch of forum threads that you could read. But other than that, what was the main point or the main advantage or main quality of Bitcoin that made you throw away your previous career? I think it was at Morgan Stanley, and decide to just go all in into Bitcoin.
Yeah, it was really scary. So I had been at Morgan Stanley, and then I started my own firm, Atlantic Financial, which is a successful firm. We had some very large, high-profile clients, some of the wealthiest institutions in the world, and we're doing very healthy revenue in the millions, and I had pretty high compensation, and I really did throw it all away. I mean, I canceled all of my my income went from a very high income to basically no income. And it wasn't like now where there's all kinds of speculation and startups and funding rounds and things like that. There was nobody with funding when I first started. Coinbase and BitPay were some of the very early ones several months after I started, and they were doing really small rounds. So there was no real VCs, there wasn't lawyers, there wasn't any of this kind of thing. So it was a big risk. And I think what attracted me at first was just the electric excitement to go to these events. The first couple events I went to really were life-changing because it was just this weird, eclectic mix of, you know, strange people and hackers and just real characters, anarchists, but a lot of real geniuses, really brilliant people that I quickly could tell that they really knew their stuff and they were excited about it. That got me excited about it. And then as I learned more, it took me, I was a slow learner, especially on this kind of cypherpunk open source stuff. It took me kind of 6 months to really understand. I came from a world where everything was about authorities. So I kept trying to figure out who's the leader and how can I get in with the people who are running this thing. And then I realized that it belongs to everybody. And that was a big mind shift coming from, you know, the world. You know, in my previous job, I was dealing with kings and you know, cabinet ministers and billionaires all the time. I was really lucky, which helped me get an insight to how the world works a little bit. Those roles are still important in their own rights, but open source is an entirely different kind of thing. And I thought at first that this sort of mantra of saying, you know, oh, there's no leaders, there's nobody in charge. I'm like, yeah, whatever. You know, it sounds like a politician saying, you know, we want more freedom or something. You don't really believe it until you experience it. So at first it was just kind of the electric excitement. And then later it was understanding like, wow, this is really something different. And understanding that it could do something that you couldn't do before, you know, to not need a trusted third party. Took a little bit of time to sink in, but once I realized that, I said, wow, that's really powerful. You can find out what's true, and you don't need any central authority to tell you what's true. You can rely on your peers to tell you what's true. So yeah, that's what got me excited about it.
So do you think that your involvement with the Bitcoin Foundation was mostly due to your previous job and your understanding of the world, and possibly you wanted Bitcoin to be somewhat political?
Not really. I think that's a fair criticism, and I understand people that, you know, do have criticism of the foundation. The foundation is an interesting animal because, you know, it evolved a lot over time. In the very early days, before I joined, you know, there's probably some valid criticism. Some people, I'm sure, wanted to kind of make it a, you know, like an official organization that's in charge or something like that. But there was also some work to say, you know, there was no, you didn't have a lot of people like Andreas who were sort of speaking for Bitcoin. There was, you know, the media was just learning about this and they were looking, you know, who can we talk to? And, you know, so it did serve some good, you know, uses as a convening point. As far as my involvement, I had been, one of my clients was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I was active with charity. I learned a lot about charity. They give away $10 million a day or so. And that's another organization that you know, I'm well aware a lot of people have different criticisms of, and I have some of my own, but overall they do quite a bit of good. They have no doubt about it, saved millions of lives. So they give, you know, $8 to $12 million a day away to various charities. So I learned a lot about nonprofits. And there is a value of nonprofits. Nonprofits can do things that there just isn't, it doesn't make financial sense to do. That's the nature of a nonprofit, where there's just no economic benefit of somebody fighting a certain fight or doing an educational initiative or something like that. So I like the idea of nonprofits, and that's something that's good about the foundation. There was some good things. When I was there, I think we did some good things with education. One of the best things was probably the DevCore education series. So for a very small amount of money, or free if you're a student, you could go and learn from, you know, we had some really great people, you know, Blue Matt and Greg Maxwell and Gavin Andreessen and Charlie Lee, and these kind of people would teach about Bitcoin. So yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly a learning experience. I think the organization overall definitely had its ups and downs. It's hard in a decentralized space to have a centralized organization, and it's a valid question to ask, you know, do you even have one? And I think the Bitcoin Foundation, because it was so early and so high profile, had a lot more pressure on it. I've had a lot of people say, you know, well, what have you done? kind of thing, which they wouldn't maybe do as much for another organization. If just 5 friends said, hey, we're going to make an educational series, everybody say, hey, great. But if it's under the Bitcoin Foundation banner, I think it might get a little more skepticism and a little bit more, criticism. But I understand that, I do, because it does sound like a centralized organization. But the most important thing, I think, with Bitcoin and open source is that the foundation never, even when it was paying the main developers like Vladimir, they didn't exercise authority, and this was before my time, but they didn't exercise authority to tell Vladimir what to write in the code. And that's important. And even if they did, what really regulates Bitcoin is what the code people decide to use. So even if you had a foundation that was really powerful and you somehow paid the developers and said, okay, change the code and make it 22 million coins and give me $1 million, it's just never going to fly. Even something, a fraction as controversial as that is never. You look at now, even the smallest movements are very controversial. That's good. That's the way it should be. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. I suppose, not perfect, but I'm probably glad that I did it overall. I don't know. It wasn't. I got a lot of hard time from working with the foundation, but I'm proud of what we accomplished when I was there.
Yeah, I think it was also an important early lesson for Bitcoin in general. As if we had this type of experiment now, it would be a lot worse because the community has grown and you have many more miners and more nodes. The protocol is clearly more decentralized than it was in 2013, 2014. And even with the congressional hearings that we have seen, with Mark Zuckerberg testifying for Libra, and what's the name of the Libra project director?
Marcus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Even him, he has been under a lot of scrutiny. And I feel like Bitcoin has gotten away from all this because it managed to be truly decentralized. If the foundation was still big and the leaders of the main exchanges were board members, like it was in 2014 with Charlie Shrem and Roger Ver and all the others, then I guess there would be a lot more questioning about the nature of Bitcoin. But
yeah, that would be interesting. A lot of people have speculated early on. I had some people say, well, it's great that there's a foundation because it's a lightning rod. If you have regulators, they're going to go to the foundation first because they think it's a centralized organization, which is sort of true. The foundation got all kinds of crazy letters in the early days from, they got a cease and desist from the state of California saying, stop all Bitcoin and, all kinds of crazy stuff like this because they, people just didn't know better and they assumed that it was, it was this centralized organization. People would also go to the foundation and say, hey, somebody hacked me or they bribed me and they wanted a bounty. I want my Bitcoin back. But now nobody would make those mistakes because everybody, even the mainstream media knows that you don't have anybody who has any sort of centralized power over that. And it would be a drawback if they were bringing, I'm never a fan of being brought in front of congressional hearings over Bitcoin. There's always somebody willing to do it because everybody wants that kind of publicity. But if I ever was asked to testify on Bitcoin, I would just say, it's an idea. And the idea is expressed in code and it was given away. So tough, it's people have a right to write down ideas. People have a right to express those in code. They have a right to give those away and they have a right to run them on a computer. And if that computer generates some weird digital widget thing called a Bitcoin, tough. That's nobody's business and nobody has any authority to mess with that. That's that, especially in the United States. That's just the core of free speech. And one thing I've done, even with the foundation, is sort of push that issue. Plattsburgh, New York, for example, tried to make a ban on mining. Any commercial mining defined as 3 or more mining devices. And I wrote a letter. I said, well, if I come in there with 3 Raspberry Pis and I'm running Bitcoin on a solar powered thing, are you gonna charge us for that? You have free speech, and you don't really have a right to do it. So if you had the right person in a congressional hearing, you could make some progress. I think it's better if they don't even have anybody to bring in front of it and don't even have anybody to ask. And I've always been against companies and organizations, and there's a lot of them in our space, they mean well, but they go out and say, oh, we want regulatory clarity. So they go to the regulators and they come out with model laws, or they'll ask the regulators for participation. I don't believe in that. Especially with Bitcoin. Securities are a little different, but with Bitcoin, I would say, you just go with the attitude of, this is free speech. You have a right to write and publish code, and you have a right to run code on your computer. Full stop. That's it. So that's the kind of advocacy I'd like to see. And I would like it to see if there was some organization like that. I don't know if it's the Bitcoin Foundation or some other organization. I'd like to see somebody, be a little bit more, kind of fighting the system with lawsuits and, bringing these up on free speech cases or something like that.
Right. And nowadays we see this wave of the so-called Bitcoin maximalism movement. And a lot of people just deny the significance or the purpose of anything else that is not Bitcoin, and they say basically it should not exist and serves no purpose and has no point unless it runs on top of Bitcoin, which is legit from maybe a long-term investment point of view, as we don't know if anything else will exist in 10 years except for Bitcoin. And it's also cautious in terms of network effects, as I don't believe, personally, I don't believe Ethereum will be around for such a long time, because it already has too many factions and seems to go into directions that are not part of the original plan. And these plans tend to change during one of their foundation meetings, which to me just means that there's a lot of centralization, which is not desirable for this space. And my criticism for maximalism is that it turns into a cult, and people act like cult members, and they read the same books, they listen to the same podcasts, they talk the same, which can be good for adoption, for spreading awareness. But on the other hand, it can look like we are just crazy people trying to do something that normies will not be interested in. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree. I think I've always tried to. I went to a small high school where we didn't have cliques like a lot of high schools. We only had small classes, and particularly I got picked on a lot when I was in junior high. So the way that I got around that, I just worked really hard to try and be, have more friends. Basically, by the time I was older. And so I was the person who was friends with the jocks and the nerds and the class president and the geeks and the computer lab. And, I was trying to be friends with everybody. And that carried on, later in my life. I ended up doing work in the Middle East where there's, right after 9/11, there's all kinds of misconceptions. I did a lot of work trying to, have people increase understanding about Islam, different things like that. And so in my nature, I try and, make more friends than enemies in this space. I hope that's something I'm known for. I try and do events and things like that have a variety of people. So I don't like closing off, doors to people. I think that's one drawback. Although I consider myself a maximalist, it really depends who you're talking to. A lot of the people who consider themselves sort of pure maximalists, they think I'm like not a maximalist at all. But then other people on another side are like, oh, Bruce is just way too into Bitcoin. You're not open-minded about things. So it's kind of funny it's just like, with politics, you could have one side or the other who both think you're part of the other side. But I'm a maximalist in the sense that I believe, certainly Bitcoin is by far the strongest chain, most secure chain, by far the best chance of being global money, and really, the only coin that can do quite what it's trying to do in an effective way. But I do think that some of the other projects, they're trying to do something different that may not have the security needs that Bitcoin has. And I'm cautious about doing anything that turns people off, particularly if you get too cliquey, like you say, if you speak your own language and you sort of push people away. You want to recognize there's all kinds of people that we're going to want to participate in this. But there's some benefits that sort of, the hodler of last resort attitude who just has a no compromising thing. I like that those people are helping to protect my Bitcoin and keep my Bitcoin valuable. So some of the real militant maximalists, I can kind of roll my eyes and say, ooh, they're not being that diplomatic, but they're also protecting my Bitcoin. because I know they're just never going to compromise on stuff. I don't lose sleep at night worrying somebody's going to mess with the code, because I know that there's people who will. I think there's people who will give their life for Bitcoin, as crazy as that is. I think there are people. I mean, I care a great deal about it, but I think there's people who, really for them it's like a religion or anything else. And I say that in a kind of a good way, because they are protecting this network. But like any religion or clique like that, there are some drawbacks. So I think it's good if people can try and understand other opinions. And I always try and say, think about it if you're at a cookout and you just ran into somebody. If you're on Twitter and you're a maximalist and somebody's talking about Ethereum, you're gonna, you might butt heads. But if you met that person at a cookout, you probably, you might be the only two people at the whole cookout that understand crypto at all. So you're gonna have more in common than the other 100 guests. Even if on Twitter you're mortal enemies, you still might have more in common. And that's why it's so great to meet people. I've been really fortunate to meet so many people in this space. And that, combined with my kind of life experience, I think makes it so I'm a little bit more, hopefully forgiving and, trying to make friends rather than enemies. But there's benefits and drawbacks of it, the way it is. I guess there's not much we could do to change it, right?
Yeah, speaking of making friends, I know that you organize this Satoshi Roundtables, and some people on Twitter seem to not like the concept and say it's some kind of obscure and mystical meeting where people plan things that the others are not allowed to know. So what are they like, and who can participate in the roundtables?
Yeah, it's so one misconception is that it's closed. It's not closed. It's that it's really limited in space. So just from the reality of logistics, we've got just a couple hundred seats, and so yeah, there is some sort of. I mean, if Brian Armstrong asks for a seat, he's going to get a seat because he runs a very, very important company. Same with pretty much any core developer who is an active contributor to Bitcoin Core. They're all going to get a seat. But it's not like, people are pushed away unless there's, a really good reason. Like if they're, like we have a no pitch policy. So if somebody comes one year and they pitch everybody, they're not going to get a seat the next year. But I've tried hard, and I definitely recognize the kind of, because it's limited in space. If I just let everybody come, then we'd end up like 1,000 people. It'd be just like consensus. And the whole purpose of it is to do something not like consensus, mainly because it's not the event that I kind of prefer. It's a little too noisy and busy. And also just the logistics. I'd need a lot more staff, and it's a different cost structure to do a big event like that. I'd need sponsors. We haven't typically had sponsors. So it's just sort of the format. It's kind of like there's a lot of dinner meetings going on right now in New York tonight with Consensus Invest. It's like a dinner meeting. They're private because usually limited in space and the economics. And I pay up front for the roundtable ahead of time, and it's not typically a very profitable thing because the model is that there's no sponsorships really. But overall, it's designed to be sort of very high signal to noise ratio, really good conversations, good breakaway sessions. We do a very decentralized format, so it's an unconference style, so people can go and break into the sessions they want. They can talk about Lightning Network or side chains or whatever. I mean, last year was great because you had sort of a couple different very Bitcoin maximalist groups that ended up gravitating together. They're just going to, and some of these people have, the other thing is we try and respect privacy, which is sometimes mistaken for secrecy, which is kind of funny because this space is all about privacy. Year 1 and 2, we really had to worry about privacy. I mean, we have pretty good reason to believe that our bags were run through in, I think it was year 2, where a whole bunch of bags were diverted to Washington, D.C. of all places, and they showed up like 2 days later. It was too weird and too coincidental. But in any event, whether it's right or wrong, there are some people who want privacy. So we try and, have the media be in a separate section, and you let people talk frankly in a private way. And there's good reason for that. Like if somebody's saying, I think this person might be a scam, but I'm not sure, that's not something if you're a CEO, you're not going to necessarily want to say that on Twitter, because you could end up hurting somebody's name when they don't deserve it. But it is something you might say in private, or you might say, gee, our investors are on our back, or, we're not sure if we're going to make payroll or whatever. These are things that CEOs and developers or other people, they're things that they may want to discuss privately. So we try and have the privacy, but some of these people have revealed themselves, or talked about it. You can talk about it yourself, and they gravitated towards their own sort of interests. So you had a whole bunch of maximalists in maximalist meetings, and then you had people across, on the other side of the venue talking about entirely different topics, and that's kind of what we try and foster. And the other thing we're trying to do is we have this farm in New Hampshire. We're trying to do, we just did one a few weeks ago. We're trying to do more open kind of community style events that use that same sort of unconference style with just, people talking about what they want, and it organically unfolds in a decentralized way. So I think it's a good event. People tend to like it. It's not perfect. We're always trying to improve it as far as, getting it more inclusive and having more people be able to participate. It is a high priority all the time. So if anybody wants to come, they can always reach out, and we'll try and make room for anybody, especially if somebody hasn't come before and they're not pitching some scam or something like that. The more the merrier.
Is there any kind of elitistic threshold, as that's also a criticism for the roundtable, that you have to have been around some kind of threshold, like you have to have been around for at least 5 years or something to participate, or to
Not
have
really.
had some kind of involvement?
It's sort of, we've had kind of, the big thing that we've tried to work with is, how do we fairly allocate this space? If we have 200 seats, how do we do that? It's in our 6th year now, so we've kind of tried everything. We did sort of, first couple of years was kind of like invitation only. We did one where we just sort of opened it and said, okay, first come, first serve. But that's problematic, because sometimes it's a shame if it fills up, and then there's, a really accomplished developer or CEO or investor or something who just doesn't have time to register early on. And we've never kicked anybody out to make room for somebody else, that's for sure. But we always try and make room for the people who are going to add the most to the conversation. And that's a big metric. How do you know who's going to add the most? It could be, we try and have a diverse group. So sometimes, like one year we had no lawyers, so I went and called a few lawyers and say, hey, you got to come. Then one year we had like a whole bunch of lawyers. So I was sort of like, oh, we need more developers now. So I called some of my friends who are developers. We try and even it out. If somebody is interesting, like a voice that you haven't heard from, somebody from another country that isn't usually represented, they could be brand new to the industry, like a new startup, or if somebody interesting, like William Shatner is coming this year. He, I think, found out about it through somebody who had attended a few times. They said, he has an interest in crypto. He's been talking about crypto a bit on his Twitter, and one of the attendees said, hey, you ought to come to this. He's not like a paid guest or anything. He's just attending. And so Shatner doesn't have some huge street cred when it comes to Bitcoin coding, but he's just an interesting person. He has an interesting life. He's a celebrity. So, and there's a couple people like that. There's different celebrities and stuff that have come. It's really hard. It's kind of a judgment call. We tried to have sort of a criteria, so like, okay, if you have a startup with X funding, or you're a core developer of one of the major 5 protocols or whatever, but it's more just kind of, you play it by ear. The good news is, I don't want to make it out like it's just so popular that you have all these people just trying to beat down the door. It does tend to be oversubscribed, but if you're interesting, or have some kind of interesting background, certainly some metrics are easy. Like if you have say a $100 million company that you're CEO of, that's a Bitcoin focused company, you sort of, we're going to try and figure out a way to make a space. Same if you're like a top 10 core developer on Bitcoin. There's certain people that are kind of obvious, but the less obvious ones, I think we've done a pretty good job. In almost all cases, people, we especially if they're early on, not the last minute, we try and make room, and and figure out a way to make it as diverse and interesting as possible. But it's hard. It's a hard job. If anybody has, I get a lot of criticism for it, but if anybody has a simple, easy, fair way to do it, it's easy to say like, oh, just do it first come first serve or whatever. But we've kind of tried all those, and it it's all about the attendees. We want the people who come. We're really lucky that a lot of really interesting people come. We want them to enjoy it. We want them. So I take a lot of their feedback. And the biggest thing is if somebody who's attended, especially a regular attendee, has a recommendation, almost always those people, we make room for those people. So if somebody says, hey, this is this tiny startup you've never heard of before, or this person is a real, brilliant whiz, they just got into it, or is really interesting. We've had all kinds of interesting people. Some of them aren't even super, known for crypto. They're just really interesting people for other areas. And that kind of adds to the overall, making the event more interesting and successful, I think.
Let's change the topic a bit and go back to 2015, 2017, when we have had that ugly scaling debate, which started with maybe the acknowledged leader of the time, Gavin Andresen, when he made BIP 101 and proposed to scale the blocks according to a plan that he made. And it was an entire process of removing leaders and establishing that nodes are more important than miners. And I guess to everybody involved, it was a learning process because we thought that miners were a lot more important than they actually were. We had some misconceptions about what Bitcoin can do and cannot do. There was a lot of skepticism regarding the Lightning Network. There was skepticism about sidechains because until Liquid was launched a year ago, there was no major project which demonstrated that the concept can actually work. So how many times have you actually changed your stance during this time period?
I think I was pretty careful to not be too strong about taking a stance. I was definitely open-minded to the point of annoying people, I think. I open-minded to the point of almost having a stance. I was kind of arguing both sides of the issue, and I argued for kind of if you have sort of the NYA sort of corporate side versus the developer side, I kind of most of the time probably argued the corporate side. I don't think I went so far as to, and in certain things, like I definitely didn't support the NYA and I didn't support it, but I sort of argued on that side, partly because I was learning myself and I still hadn't made up my mind. And partly because I think that one of my strengths, especially coming from the corporate world, one of my strengths is kind of, I've been a salesperson and kind of a debater sort of person. So I think I have a strength in taking other people's opinion, trying to put them in a way that I can sort of argue a case for somebody else. So in the very early days, when it first began, like a lot of people, I just couldn't understand why can't you just fix it? Just get together and compromise and fix it. But a lot of the people from more of the strong development side, people like Adam Back, he's probably the best example. And he was very kind to spend a lot of time with me and people like me. I remember one time we spoke on the phone for like 3.5 hours one time, and he was just trying to explain to me and convince me, what's different about open source and why this works. And him and other people like that, Eric Lombroso is another one, Jameson Lopp, people who came from a different world than I did, really informed my opinion quite a bit. And then I would go back to kind of the corporate people and say, okay, here's why this is important, because it's all about security. If we let security become weak, then nothing else matters, kind of thing. Nick Szabo is another one that, mainly from his readings. I haven't spent tons of time with him, but listening to these people who really have this sort of security first attitude, I'm convinced, and that's the way that I ended up falling on it. But because of, sort of arguing it so much in the early days, sometimes, thank God I'd never signed that New York agreement. You never hear the end of it. And I didn't support it, but I think the difference between me and a lot of other people is that I I think I have more sympathy and more understanding, because I do understand very much the other side of it, the kind of Coinbase side of it, which was they were envisioning a split being very bad, a chain fork. And now we've had a bunch of chain forks, but we didn't know what was going to happen at the time. So that was really like, wow, this is so early. If this splits and there's two Bitcoin, people are going to be confused about which one. That was something there was a lot of fear about, because it was unknown. And then also just sort of the usability, for right or wrong, a lot of people came into Bitcoin, and I think some would say that was, wrong. It was misconceptions that Bitcoin was supposed to be free or almost free, very fast method of payment. And if you remember the early days, 2012, 13, it was all about merchants. I got my local coffee house, and I got, we have Tiger Direct and this company and that company who are accepting it. And that's what everything was about. So when fees, I remember one time Roger Ver gave a speech. He's like, we're going to be paying, if this continues, it's going to be 30 cents for a fee. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, 30 cents. That'll just wreck Bitcoin. At least some people thought that. There was other people who said, no, that was never what the point of Bitcoin was. And you've got to be careful about kind of rewriting history sometimes too. There's, you don't want to just go too far to the store of value side. But I think my opinions were really evolving on that. It was, a very interesting learning experience. I'm really glad I had a front row seat. I'm definitely not the smartest guy in this space by any long shot. There's so many really smart people. But one thing that I am really thankful for is that I've had a good seat to something that's just as interesting as any movie or Game of Thrones episode in the world. And I did get to sit in a lot of these meetings. We had meetings that I was involved with, and phone calls and things like that. And I'm good friends with folks on all different sides. I like a lot of people from the different sides of this complex issue. And I'm really, really thankful for that. But, overall, I think that most people were trying to do the right thing, I guess would be my biggest takeaway. I came out one particular way. I happen to sort of agree with the Bitcoin maximalist, don't change, keep the security first. But, I respect the other people on the other sides too.
So how do you feel about the fact that we had a chain split and now the big blockers have a blockchain of their own to experiment with the big blocks?
I think it's good overall. I mean, I think that I'm not a big fan of trying to use the name Bitcoin. It's a little hard to say, okay, this is the real Bitcoin. No, that's the real Bitcoin. I mean, it'd be really clean and easy if you just, and I think it would probably be more successful if they would have just called it Bitcash. And, this is a fork of Bitcoin, and here's the thing. I mean, I'm talking about Bitcoin Cash. For Bitcoin SV, I don't know. I'm not even a fan of kind of using the Satoshi name. We're trying to decrease the Satoshi name for the Satoshi Roundtable for a similar reason. When the name came out, it was kind of abstract, like Sats or something like that. But that's another issue. But, forks are great because, both chain forks and code forks, because that's the nature of open source. Everybody can have their own ideas and everybody can run their own thing. And I do believe that almost all of these projects help Bitcoin because if anything, you can learn what doesn't work. It can inspire Bitcoin to be more competitive in certain things. And there's always going to be some group, usually a minority group, that just wants to do something different. They're going to want their own method of account or whatever, and that's just the nature of the world. I don't buy this idea that everybody's all going to agree on one thing. We've seen that already. So I think the forks are good in the sense that it's a learning experience, and there's people that just might not, for whatever reason, might not be interested in contributing to Bitcoin or building on Bitcoin. And it's free, and it's open source. So the nature of the software license is that anybody can do anything with it, and they can try it and run their own code. And if they have something that's worthwhile and has market value over time, then that'll be good. If not, then it's a learning experience. So I'm not against those. And I don't buy the argument that having lots of people contribute to other projects is a drain on Bitcoin, because I mean, the Ethereum community, for example, is so different in many ways. A lot of those people just wouldn't be contributing at all. It's not like all those thousands of people would be involved in Bitcoin if they weren't. It's like they're maybe have different interests, different things that they're doing. And hopefully the overall ecosystem benefits from that. You know, some of the projects may not benefit the Bitcoin ecosystem, but I think overall Bitcoin is better now than it would have been if for the last 4 years, say, you didn't have any of these projects, you know.
Right. Now, let's shift the point of discussion to privacy, as you have mentioned before that privacy is important during Satoshi Roundtable meetings. So, what is your stance in regards to Bitcoin privacy? And I guess you have multiple layers for sending privacy, receiving privacy, protocol level privacy with Tor and stuff, and sometimes wallets fix that. But I suppose that after the scaling debate has settled and we have had Lightning, it just opened the gates for privacy conversations. And whether or not we want confidential transactions or we want to move our Bitcoins to side chains or mix them or do stuff like that. What do you think about privacy in Bitcoin?
I think it's really, really important. I think from a computer science standpoint, there's a lot of people with sort of similar technical skills to me, which is like, you know, I'm a big techie compared to your average person on the street, but I'm a fool compared to somebody who's a real developer. So a lot of these things should be left to the, you know, a lot of the more advanced discussions on the implementation of these things is more of a, you know, more technical. But from a, you know, overall priority standpoint, I think that privacy should be way, way, way up there. I suppose security has got to be always first, but privacy, I would put maybe number 2, 3, something like that. There's probably smarter people than me to ask on that, but I think privacy is really important, and I think that it to me, what Bitcoin is fits really well with privacy. I view the Cypherpunk Manifesto as kind of the origin and soul of what Bitcoin is. And that it's a short paper, but it's all about privacy. And it was written even before we have these concerns that we have now. It was written before we worried about everything we know about Snowden and China and the United States and the NSA and everything. Not to mention corporations, you know, Target and the VA and everybody else who leaks your records. You have people actively spying on you. And you also have people just voluntarily giving out information. I've become a fan of TikTok lately because I think it's a great next generation platform. The power of these very short videos is very powerful, but the amount of information they're going to know about people, it's just stunning. They're going to know what your favorite color is, what kind of person you're attracted to, what kind of car you like. You know, over time, if people are watching hours of short videos and they're you know, skipping some and liking others, that's very powerful data. So I'm very, very cautious about privacy in this digital world. And that was envisioned in the Cypherpunk Manifesto and some of these other early works, some science fiction and other things. So I think for Bitcoin to, you know, live up to its vision, privacy's got to be a huge, huge priority. And so it's always tricky. Anything in the core protocol, you want to be very, very cautious about messing with it. And especially, you know, I don't even know if anything that requires a hard fork is even that practical, because anything that's at all controversial, it's a challenge. It can result in another, another chain fork or whatever. But I understand there's a lot of tools. There's obviously, you know, second layer kind of things that can enhance privacy. And there's a lot of other things that can be added. And I understand that Litecoin is adding Mimblewimble. I think that if there's more of these kind of things that are working with other protocols, then you know, hopefully they'll be. And I don't even know if technically that's a good idea or not, but hopefully something like that would be implemented to Bitcoin. And I think that. So the world is really complex now, and one of the good things about Bitcoin is that it can make the global economic world just that, global. And we haven't really had that before. It's been very hard to send money from country to country, very hard to move securities and things like that. Bitcoin makes it able to do that, but the world is a very complex place. There's nothing where you're going to have all of these different authorities agree. The government of Israel and the government of Saudi Arabia, the government of Taiwan, the government of China, and the Dalai Lama are not all going to agree on who should be banned and censored. And the United States has relations with all those groups, so they're not going to agree either. And so you need, I'm really a big believer that you need a base layer that's really, really hard to censor and as close to immutable as possible, and also that enables people to build the privacy on top of it. And then maybe in their own jurisdiction, China can make a rule that says you can't have this sort of wallet, or they can restrict internet transactions or whatever. But at least if the base layer is truly private, then you have the ability for activists or other people kind of off the grid somewhere to be able to transact. And I think that's really key for a free society. And we've got to make that a huge priority, in my opinion, if we can technically do it.
I spoke to Paul Pewey about 2 weeks ago, and I know that you're an advisor in Edge Wallet. And he told me that if privacy ends up being an option in Bitcoin, then it's pointless, because it's going to be just like Zcash, and a lot of people take pride nowadays in the fact that Bitcoin is auditable and they can prove that any transaction happened. But at the same time, it's terrible because you're revealing how many Bitcoins the person who sent you an amount actually owns. And unless you know how to do UTXO management, it's just terrible because it reveals the funds of everybody else involved in trades with you. And if there's going to be just a small amount of transactions that are private by a limited number of individuals, they're going to be easy to identify. And it's
Right.
easy to do analysis on the blockchain and see this transaction was private. And these people are known to be privacy advocates. So it's just a matter of figuring out who is who and who sent to whom, as opposed to being by default and having privacy from the first moment when you make a transaction, which is a much more powerful tool.
Yeah, I like the idea of, it's just like Tor. There's been data that, that you can figure out if there's ways to figure out if you're in a small town. I mean, we're in a pretty small city, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's only, 10 people running Tor at a time, or maybe one or something like that. From what I understand, that can be, kind of like Bitcoin, if you're one of the only people using privacy. I think it's better as a default if this stuff is used by everybody. And I think that, that's where advocacy comes back into play. I think we need to have some pushback against global governments that they have the right to this privacy. When I became a stockbroker in 1992, I could open an account. It was just ending, so it was right at the beginning of my career. It would have been just before I started, especially like 91 or so. You could open an account over the phone. I could call you up and say, "Hey, buy 100 shares of IBM," and you could say yes, and I could just write your name down, name and address, and then you had a week to pay. And I didn't need your ID. It wasn't even until a little bit after I started, it was probably late 92 or something, I would need a little more information, like your date of birth and stuff. And then later they said, okay, now you need your social security. And then they said this, and then they said, okay, now you need an ID. And a lot of the older brokers just freaked out. They're like, ID? This is going to kill my business. What the hell business is of ours to ask for an ID? It would be like going to somebody selling milk right now. If you went to the people selling milk and say, okay, from now on, anytime you sell milk, you got to have an ID. And the old stockbrokers are like, well, what are you talking about? What do I need an ID for? They want to buy IBM stock. That's their business. That's their money. If the IRS thinks they're cheating on their taxes, let the IRS chase them. I'm not taking an ID. And there was a big uproar about it, but the government just slammed its fist down. And now, 20 some odd years later, it's like the government has this birthright to, forget about your ID. You need, 2 forms of ID and your social and all this other information. It's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. The economy worked just fine for decades and decades without this. Most of this stuff has no economic value. It's frankly put in place because of fear over, nonsensical issues, worried about, fear mongering with terrorism or whatever. And I don't think it is the right of governments. And they've got so much now. They know so much information about it that they can combine with the Facebooks and the other data aggregators and other things like that I think it's a real priority for us to fight back on people and say, wait a minute, you should have a right to be able to move your money around. And the people arguing it for it really just want more power and authority. Ben Losky and the bit license and everything. He used terrorism as an excuse, and they'll use human trafficking as an excuse. But these things are very, very small pieces of the economy relative to the benefits of having privacy. Government violates our privacy all the time. I would like to see more people pushing back. Unfortunately, a lot of that, there's laws in place, the Patriot Act and some of these other things. It's not something you can just be an activist against. You actually have to change the law. And there's not a lot of groups. I don't know of any industry group that's really actively trying to fight these things, but it doesn't mean we should give up. I think that's the way we should go. We should be, pushing back on these things and make it the way it was, 20 years ago or so. I don't think you can really argue that all this obsession with AML, KYC, it's all brand new stuff. And I don't think you can really argue that it's made things better. It's slowed things down immensely. Bitcoin would be, I don't even know where it would be if you didn't have all these. Imagine if you didn't have all these regulations about AML, KYC for Bitcoin, and you didn't have the money transmitter rules, and you didn't have the bit license. I mean, the industry would be a lot bigger. It'd be a lot more easy for people to move things around. And I mean, you just think of the jobs and the efficiency and everything that's caused by this stuff. I think that we really got to push back as citizens. And not to beat on the Cypherpunk Manifesto all the time, but that's exactly what it said in there. You make code that can do this. The technical is the best solution. If you can make technical solutions that enable people to do this, that's the best way. It's probably easier than trying to change laws. And in some countries, forget about changing the laws. There's countries where being a blogger is illegal, where being gay is illegal. And they're not going to come around to something that allows privacy for people to accept money. So it's our job to make technical solutions. And if you're in a country like the United States, at least make it so the government doesn't try and squash those solutions, so that you can protect, even if it's activists in other countries, having that privacy is huge.
Yeah, I think Coin Center is one of these advocacy groups which helps at least promote and maybe advocate for the issues of the Orwellianism in the financial system. And you said that you don't show the ID to the milkman when you buy milk, but actually if you pay by credit card or debit card, they're going to see in the receipt what your name is and what your account number is. So you're revealing a lot of data when you decide not to pay in cash.
Yep. Yeah, and Facebook can see if you have location enabled on your phone. They can see when you walk into the milk store. They know when you're buying stuff, and there's certain, depending on how much data you've given away, they're going to know where you live. They know when you go to the store, and they know how much you spend. And a lot of times these groups share data. So it really is, as we have all these benefits of this crazy digital world that we're in, it's really exciting to be able to talk to people all over, but we do have some serious privacy issues. And I think they've only, fortunately, most of the abuse has been just companies trying to sell you something, which isn't that bad, really. And it can actually be good if you have really targeted ads. But there's a lot more nefarious uses of that privacy that people can do to get into people's lives and business and wallets and use against people. So hopefully that'll be something we can fight back with better privacy tools.
Yeah, I didn't think about this much, but it just struck me right now that in the 90s, people were very much concerned with paying with credit card over the internet. And we had a shot with David Chaum's DigiCash, who had this idea to only reveal the kind of data that is relevant for the transaction that you're making. And if that became a standard in the banking system, then I guess nowadays, maybe, possibly after 9/11, we would still have more privacy than we already do.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. The Patriot Act was a big one. There was the there was a couple money laundering things that came out before that. I'm trying to remember the exact time frame. I remember in my career, like I said, a few years after I started was when they first had these things, and then a few years after that was 9/11, where everything changed. About within a year after 9/11, you had the Patriot Act, and it just totally upended our industry as financial advisors, where you needed, all kinds of information, and that's driven by the banks. And there's also, regulatory pressure. I always forget the name of it. Operation Choke Point, I think Choke Point, where the banks had all this pressure from puritanical government bureaucrats who just said, well, these certain industries are legal, but we don't like them. And it was like, anything to do with marijuana, sex workers, pornography, legal pornography, these kind of things. Although it's legal to be a webcam model, certain government bureaucrats said, well, we don't like this. So they made it so these people had to become unbanked. And that's very, very dangerous. You combine that with some of these other things, this trend of cancel culture and this, concerns about, who is doing hate speech and what organizations should be banned and things like that. That's a very dangerous road to go down, because we're kind of like this far away from somebody being able to say, okay, Bitcoin Magazine is a hate publication. It's hateful and harmful to the banks. And the banks are a cornerstone of the economy, and that's terroristic, and they shouldn't be able to say these things. And I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's not that far, it's not that far removed from what you're already seeing. You have people who are deplatformed, and you have, just these really bad combination of things that's happening when it comes to freedom and free speech. So it's sort of fundamental with the banking system itself. You have all these regulations that I just think are very, very hard to change, but you can just sort of create a new, better system over on the side. And you still have some, that's what I'm seeing with securities. You have some, base regulations, but at least all of the stuff that's piled on top of this over the years, that's sort of not part of the regulations, you can ignore. So hopefully that, I'm really optimistic. I think it's one of the only hopes for humanity if we continue down this road where we have no privacy and government and corporations know every single thing about us because of these, surveillance devices that we all are addicted to carrying around in our pocket. Technology is the only hope, really.
So do you believe that Bitcoin in the end, after it becomes private and fungible, should become much more of a mean of exchange than it is now?
Yeah, I think it would be, particularly if you could get people using it more so that it becomes, it's already its own system. But right now, a lot of it is focused on on-ramps and off-ramps. And that kind of goes with Bitcoin by itself is much more private than your classic fiat rails system where your identity is tied to everything. So if Bitcoin has more privacy and more usage, and you see it using as, the settlement for more things, I want to see it be used for settlement for the global securities market and your coffee, then, in a perfect world, people are earning Bitcoin kind of privately, and they're transacting privately, and they can comply with whatever government jurisdiction, rules there are in their own jurisdiction about what they have to report or whatever, but at least they have more control over it. I think that could really help adoption. And there's a lot of legitimate needs that people have for privacy. And maybe if we see more erosion through, what we're seeing with the government and social media and the regular media, if they continue to erode our privacy, maybe people will take more, take that more seriously. I mean, one of the other things that's been good about being in this community is that I think we're all a lot more security conscious than your average person. I mean, your average people don't even use two-factor, but your average Bitcoiner not only uses two-factor, but they don't use SIM two-factor. They use, and they have redundant devices and different fake phone numbers and fake addresses and things like that. Just because we're more security conscious. But if people have their privacy eroded, maybe you'll see more people doing that kind of thing. And that definitely, hopefully will fit well with Bitcoin, using it using it more often for those people who want that kind of privacy. But like you said, it's not there yet, because you have these organizations like Coin Analytics that can they can find out quite a bit from a Bitcoin transaction the way it is now. So we definitely need to have some changes in the way things work for that to be realized.
Also, I guess we need to educate Bitcoin holders to not order stuff on websites like Amazon and give their home addresses, because that leads to a kind of record which associates their Bitcoin wallet with an address and a name, and that will end up doxing a lot of other people who transacted with them. But anyway,
Yeah.
my last question for you is, are you coming to the Bitcoin 2020 conference in San Francisco, which takes place in March?
Yeah, I don't have that on my schedule, but it looks really good. I'd love to see if I can work it. I've seen some of the posts on it. It looks like you've got a great group of speakers there. So
Yeah, we have
I'd
Tony
definitely like
Hawk.
to check it out. What's that?
We have Tony Hawk
Cool.
and Nick Szabo.
Yeah, awesome.
So it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Consider
I'd love to
this some kind
participate.
of invitation.
All right, cool.
So, Mr. Fenton, this was really great, and I feel like I've learned a lot during the last hour. And I'm happy that you took your time to talk to me and do this interview. So thank you very much.
This is really fun. Well, thanks for everything, and keep up the good work. I mean, you guys have been, for a long time, have been just a fixture in at the center of this whole world. In the broad crypto world, Bitcoin is like I said, by far the most important technology in this whole industry. It's the ultimate blockchain, and you guys have been the ultimate publication in covering that. So good work on that.